Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going.
Fuji's out this bitch.
Didn't Andre 3000 have a baby with Lauryn Hill? You just said Lauryn Hill and the Andre 3000 song came on. That was crazy.
No, I think
But something. We close.
Andre
It was
3000 had a
Marley.
baby
It was a Marley with Lauryn Hill. We were close.
Erykah Badu, I think.
In many ways,
think.
transformative
We were in it.
in a negative sense.
President Richard Nixon was the first to coin the term a war on drugs, but President Ronald Reagan turned that rhetorical war into a literal one.
It's back to school time for America's children, and while drug and alcohol abuse cuts across all generations, it's especially damaging to the young people on whom our future depends.
The modern war on drugs was declared by Ronald Reagan in 1982.
As we mobilize for this
Jeez
national crusade,
Louise.
I'm
When you
mindful
born
that
in?
drugs are a constant
I was
temptation
born
to
in
many.
83.
Popular
Oh, dang.
opinion polls of the day show that it wasn't an issue for most people in the United States. But Reagan was determined to put this onto the agenda, to define it as a problem.
The war against drugs is a war of individual battles.
Reagan used his wife, for example, in this Just Say No campaign.
She has helped so many of our young people to say no to drugs. Nancy, much credit belongs to you. This is your brain.
I saw this commercial today. It's an up-to-date version of it today.
Are you serious?
I was laughing like shit.
What is that? What are they talking about?
Young, it's an up-to-date commercial like this. It's a woman doing it now.
Some people say, well, how could you join the person to clear the war on drugs, or someone like Ronald Reagan? Well, I joined with Nancy Reagan because she said, just say no.
Just say no so loud that everyone around you can hear.
We're talking about a general education that we're talking about. We're not talking
She's
about
on
locking up
Zoloft,
people.
man.
We're talking about educating people. We're talking about prevention.
There was a crisis in the U.S. economy at that time.
I regret to say that we're in the worst economic mess since the Great Depression.
There is a frontal assault on institutions that are designed to assist human beings on the education system, welfare, on jobs, healthcare.
Government programs
Exactly.
that can't be paid
Section
for out
8.
of a balanced budget must be paid for out of your pocket. They're saying the rich are getting richer.
That's why
and the
everybody
poor are
thinks black
getting
people be
poorer.
on Section 8 and got a rack of kids.
The freedom of American business and the entrepreneurial class.
We will save $1.8 billion in fiscal year 1982.
Luxury stores like Neiman Marcus predicts record sales.
I got a post, I think 1933, the United States declared bankruptcy, signed the paper and everything, like ink signature, like they're bankrupt. So ever since then, we've been joking. Like ever since then, it's been a joke. Like all these people are a joke.
But it
It's
is
been a
a
joke.
lower
That's why
rate
they do
than
that.
it
It's a
was in
joke.
the preceding years before we got here.
Somebody has to. I
It has
keep
begun
posting, but somebody has to
decline,
realize
but
this
it is
stuff.
still going up.
In
Stop
the
participating in it.
mid-1980s, we were already starting to embark on a war on drugs, and then all of a sudden along comes this new drug, crack cocaine.
Steve Young reports on a new kind of cocaine called crack.
It's dangerous, it's deadly, it will kill you.
The drug epidemic is as dangerous as any terrorist that we face. That is just some of what was said today to House and Senate committees holding hearings on drug abuse in America.
We had this drug that could be marketed in very small doses, relatively inexpensively. This was going to just take over communities, and particularly African American communities.
Crack was largely an inner city issue, and cocaine was largely a suburban issue.
Smokable cocaine, otherwise known as crack. It is an uncontrolled
That you
fire.
smoke.
Congress, in virtually record time, established mandatory sentencing penalties for crack that were far harsher than those for powder cocaine.
The same amount of time in prison for 1 ounce of crack cocaine that you get for 100 ounces of powder cocaine.
Police here are cracking down on crack
But it's the same shit,
1 ounce
just
to
broke
100
down
ounces.
differently.
Imagine having 1 ounce versus 100 ounces.
That
You
is
get the
just
same
so
amount of
dumb.
time.
Lord, that's dumb.
100 ounces of green couldn't even fit, barely fit in your closet. 1 ounce of crack is fucking like that.
And if you're white, you pretty much get a slap on the wrist.
Cocaine
100 pounds of
was
cocaine.
more
ain't that down.
sophisticated. It was just a powder.
By next year, our spending for drug law enforcement will have more than tripled from its 1981 level.
So he used the money they saved, fake saved, to put it. See that? We're gonna save it on the fiscal year, then we're gonna use it for the police.
I mean, Freeway Ricky Ross proved that.
Literally cutting off men from their families, literally huge chunks just disappearing into our prisons, and for really long times.
Millions of dollars will be allocated for prison and jail facilities.
You know, these sorts of disparities under Reagan
quickly exploded.
Every time I hear a person, I be like Reagan the worst, Nixon. They all, I can't pick who's the worst. They all the worst. I said Nixon, but I gotta say Nixon. He kind of started
economic inequality, of
Nixon speaking into existence and Reagan ran with it, and Bill Clinton just
the
crushed
problem of drug abuse and criminalizes all of that in the form of the war on drugs.
We absolutely should have treated crack and cocaine as exactly the same thing. I think it was an enormous
Newton Gingrich had to say.
burden on the black
Everybody thought he was racist.
But it also fundamentally violated a sense of core
Could be, but he had good
When crack cocaine hit in the early 80s, there were a lot of mayors and so on who felt very strongly that this is a real threat and they wanted to crack down on it. And Rangel was one of the guys pushing for stronger sentencing.
It may have seemed like a good idea at the time, but it sure didn't work out.
Yo, man, at least he can admit he was wrong.
Then years later, there was an effort to rewrite history that it was a racial disparity.
I thought it was for prevention.
Disparity put in by being white people.
I like the way he said that.
In many ways, the so-called war on drugs was a war on communities of color, a war on black communities, a war on Latino communities.
And you see a rhetorical war that was, announced as part of a political strategy by Richard Nixon, and which morphed into a literal war by Ronald Reagan, turning to something that began to feel nearly genocidal in many poor communities of color.
So Nixon's Southern strategy was implemented right after the Civil Rights Movement. He played on fear of crime and law and order to win the election easily.
Fear of
Reagan
crime.
promised tax cuts
Of
to the
fear.
rich
Fear.
and
Of
to throw all the
something.
crack users in jail, both of which devastated communities of color